Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I've been investing into peer-to-peer loans for quite some time now, and over the past 4 years, I've managed to return a 16% per year return over 4 years. So in this video, I wanted to talk about peer-to-peer lenders. I'll talk briefly on the advantages and disadvantages of investing through these peer-to-peer lending platforms, as well as talk about how I managed to earn that 16% per year return. And also give you my opinion on what I think peer-to-peer lenders and lending as an asset class will go into in the future. If you enjoyed this content and more personal finance and investing topics, be sure to subscribe. This video is purely for entertainment purposes only, and this video is not a recommendation against or for investing in peer-to-peer loans. You should always do your own research before investing, and if you need financial advice, do seek help from an authorized financial advisor. So to just give you an overview of what peer-to-peer lending is basically a marketplace where borrowers and lenders can come together and borrow or lend money. So as a borrower, you are getting a lower interest rate compared to what a bank would charge. And as a lender, you'll be getting a higher interest rate than what the bank would offer. This works out because the peer-to-peer platform doesn't have the same overheads as a traditional bank does. Because of the lower overheads from the peer-to-peer lender, these benefits then flow on to borrower and lenders alike. As a lender, you lend money to borrowers who borrow for a wide variety of reasons. Some of them include debt consolidation, to spend money on improving their homes, or medical bills, etc. And what the peer-to-peer platform offers is a service whereby they assess the credit worthiness of your borrowers. So the borrowers will enter their information onto the application, and the application will then, based on the information and the algorithm based on historical loans, determine the credit worthiness of a borrower and assign them a grade. And that grade is what determines the interest rates that the borrower will have to pay and the lenders will receive. So as a rule of thumb, A-grade loans tend to be the lowest risk loans and the lowest risk of default, as well as the lowest interest rate on offer. And then depending on what platform you use, it can go up to E or F grade, those being the highest risk loans, and highest risk means a higher interest rate as well. And then you have everything in between from A to F, and the interest rates and the risk correlates to the grade that they have. And so there are many different platforms out there in terms of peer-to-peer lending, and the interest rates that they offer depends on whether, one, it depends what country you're in, and two, it also depends on whether the loans are secured or not. So a secure loan is basically backed by asset. So the borrower have to put up an asset, and they say, if I can't pay this loan, then you can sell the asset and retrieve some of the money back. And so intrinsically, the secure loans have a lower risk attached to it. And so with lower risk, there's lower interest rates. So in New Zealand, there are two main platforms, Squirrel Money and Harmoney. So personally, I've used Harmoney over the past 4 years. So when it comes to examples in here, I'll be talking about the examples using Harmoney. But across the board and in general, the ideas stay the same, and the platforms basically run a similar model, and the fees might be slightly different, so just be careful out there. So peer-to-peer lending has had a lot of mixed reviews from the investment community. There are some people who love it and some who hate, warning others not to invest in peer-to-peer lending. So this video I thought would be good to let you decide for yourself whether it's for you or it's not, and going forward how I think it would play out coming into a possible recession as well. So let's move on to the advantages of peer-to-peer lending. So the first one is that peer-to-peer lending is a form of passive income. Passive income is income that you don't have to do a lot of work. You just have to set it up once, and income will continue flowing into your bank. So with peer-to-peer lending, they have what they call a auto-invest criteria. The auto-invest criteria essentially lets you set up the criteria of loans that you want to lend to, and it'll automatically reinvest any interest that you earn or principal that the borrower has repaid into your account back into those loans with that set criteria. And this function has allowed me not to check the platform. So for example, like in the past year, I've only checked really maybe twice a year, right? I haven't been going in a lot, and it's something that I've sort of just set and forget. So peer-to-peer lending is definitely automated, very much automated, and you don't really have to pick out your own loans because all you do is set up a criteria and AutoLend does everything for you. The second benefit of investing through peer-to-peer lenders is that you have the benefit of fractionalization. Fractionalization allows you to diversify your lending into multiple borrowers in lots of $25. So if you have $1,000, you can split it across 40 different people, each lending $25. Then chances of all 40 of them going bankrupt and being unable to pay is quite low. So out of that 40, you might have 1 or 2 that go bankrupt. You would be able to generate interest across the 38 people who manage to pay off the loans. And hopefully what you get is enough money to cover the losses of that 1 or 2 defaults. Let's talk about the disadvantages of peer-to-peer lending. So the first one is the lack of liquidity. When you lend to borrowers, you lend out in terms of 36-month terms or 60 months terms. And between that 3 to 5 years, you're not able to withdraw that money unless the borrower pays all in advance. So for example, they might have taken out a loan for 5 years, but then after the first year, they have enough money and they can pay off all that at once. And so you might receive that money, all that $25 back after a year. But this is not guaranteed and it isn't something that you should be banking on. Other platforms out there have secondary markets where you can sell your loans that haven't matured yet. This allows you to cash out quicker, but there are some platforms that don't have a secondary market. So just be careful out there when you're lending money through these peer-to-peer platforms because you're not able to get your money out until your loan matures. The second thing you need to know with peer-to-peer lending is that the income that you earn through the platform is treated as ordinary income and is taxed at your highest tax level. In New Zealand, the second downside is that you're not able to deduct the write-offs against your income that you earn. So this is treated as a loss on capital, and this loss on capital is a capital loss which is non-tax deductible. So the treatment of income tax here is slightly unfavorable compared to investing in shares, and this is similar across the other countries as well. This is not tax advice, so consult a tax advisor if you require specific tax advice. So moving on to how I actually did return a 16% return on Harmony. But before we do that, let's have a look at the average return on the platform so you can sort of see how I managed to perform compared to the average. As at the 13th of September 2019, the average retail investor on Harmony has returned a 12.26% return. The platform as a whole has returned a 10.81% return, and wholesale investors, which basically are institutional investors such as banks, have returned a 10.34%. So overall, if I'm comparing to retail investors, I have outperformed retail investors by about 4%. So how I managed to return a 16% largely was determined on the type of loans that I was after. I focus on having a high percentage of my portfolio on C and D grades, which tend to be a higher risk loan profile. With higher risk also comes higher returns. So in order to offset the higher risk, what I did was set certain criteria which mitigated some of the risk of default. So the first one was having a low repayment to income ratio. So a repayment to income ratio basically shows you how much of a borrower's income they're using to pay off monthly installments. And so I set this at below 10 to 15% to basically mitigate some of the risk of them not being able to pay it. The second criteria that I had was the type of loans that they were borrowing it for. So what I like to lend to are debt consolidation purposes loans. Debt consolidation basically is when a borrower decides to borrow to pay off other debt, and usually the other debt would tend to have a higher interest rate. What I tend to avoid is people borrowing money to go on holiday, Basically, anything that is used as a one-off expense, that's something that I try to avoid, because when they spend that money, then they have to earn it back. And when they earn it back, then only subsequently will they pay you. So personally, I've done very well out of the two criterias, and I've managed to actually keep a hold on my defaults. Because of that, I have returned a 16% return over the past 4 years, which has been a very satisfactory result for me. Just to sidetrack a little bit, I actually had a friend who started in Harmony around the same time as I did, and his approach was slightly different from mine. So in his portfolio, he had a higher weighting of safer loans. So he put more money into A, B, and C grade loans. And so over the past 4 years, he was able to generate a return of around 9 to 10%. So his return was significantly lower than mine over the past 4 years because he invested in safer loans. And that brings me to the next topic that I really wanted to discuss, which is what would happen to peer-to-peer lending in the coming years. In the coming years, there's a lot of talks about a recession happening. Well, if a recession does come, then chances are across the board, the peer-to-peer default rate should increase significantly. However, I expect that the lower grade bonds, so the higher risk ones, would default more than the A grade, and that's reflected in the default rate. However, when a recession comes, people aren't able to repay their loans, and you would expect an expansion of the default rate, more so within the lower grade loans. For example, my portfolio probably wouldn't have performed quite as well as his would, as his was more of a protective, more measured portfolio with lower returns but also lower risk, whereas mine was a high risk, high return portfolio that might not fare so well under a recession. Also to note that during a recession, your money is locked in there, so that's one of the downsides of investing in peer-to-peer lending at the moment when there is a lot of talks about a recession happening. To sum up, I think peer-to-peer lending is a great way to diversify your stock market portfolio with some asset class that acts like bonds and produces interest over time. However, during a recession, this might change, and the results that we have currently will not continue on if a recession does happen. Chances are the returns that you'll receive will decrease significantly if a recession does happen. If a recession doesn't happen, then chances are the portfolios will continue to perform the same way as it has in the past. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up to start compounding your interest today. Until then, take care.